The door slammed open, and Ezra froze, his lips still brushing against Theo's, the taste of coffee lingering between them. In that split second, the world tilted. His roommate Jordan stood in the doorway, eyes wide, mouth agape, clutching a pizza box like it was his lifeline. Ezra's heart plummeted, not because he was ashamed, but because he hadn't meant for their secret to spill out like this, raw and unfiltered, in the middle of their San Francisco apartment. It was supposed to be a quiet Thursday night. Ezra, 25, a graphic designer with a penchant for oversized sweaters and a quiet intensity, had invited Theo over to study. Theo, 24, a barista with a sharp wit and a smile that could melt glaciers, had been Ezra's not-so-secret crush for months. They'd been dancing around their feelings since meeting at a local art gallery, where Theo's commentary on abstract painting had made Ezra laugh so hard he'd nearly spilled his wine. Tonight, though, the air had shifted. Study notes lay forgotten on the coffee table, replaced by stolen glances and a tentative kiss that had just ignited into something more when Jordan barged in. Jordan, 26, a software engineer with a knack for bad timing, dropped the pizza box on the counter, his expression a mix of shock and something unreadable. Wow. Okay, he stammered, running a hand through his curly hair. Y'all didn't say you were together. His voice wavered, not with judgment, but with the awkwardness of stumbling into a moment too private for words. Ezra pulled back, his face burning, but Theo's hand stayed firm on his knee, grounding him. Jordan, it's not, Ezra started, but Theo cut him off, his voice steady despite the tension. It's exactly what it looks like, Theo said, his green eyes locking onto Jordan's. We're figuring things out. You cool with that? The room held its breath. Ezra's pulse raced, not just from the kiss but from the weight of Theo's words. They hadn't labeled this thing between them, hadn't dared to, not when Ezra was still untangling his own identity. Raised in a small Ohio town where different was a dirty word, moving to San Francisco had been his escape, a chance to breathe, but he'd never expected to find someone like Theo, who made him want to stop hiding. Jordan blinked, then let out a nervous laugh. Cool? Man, I'm just mad you didn't tell me you were snagging the cute barista from down the street. He hesitated, then added, but like you guys are good, right? I mean, this is serious. Ezra's throat tightened. Serious. Was it? He glanced at Theo, whose expression was soft but unyielding, like he was daring Ezra to say what they both felt. Yeah, Ezra said finally, the word small but heavy. It's serious. The night unraveled from there, not into disaster, but into something unexpectedly warm. Jordan, to his credit, didn't bolt. He cracked open the pizza box, slid it across the counter, and said, Well, I'm not eating this alone. You two lovebirds joining or what? It was a peace offering, clumsy but genuine, and Ezra felt a knot loosen in his chest. They ate, the three of them, perched on mismatched stools in their tiny kitchen. Theo's knee brushed Ezra's under the counter, a quiet reminder of the moment they'd been caught in. Jordan, ever the talker, filled the silence with stories about his latest coding project, but his eyes kept flickering to Ezra, like he was seeing him for the first time. Ezra wondered what Jordan was thinking. Had he suspected? Had he cared? Growing up, Ezra had braced for rejection, but Jordan's easy acceptance felt like a gift he hadn't earned. As the night wore on, Theo reached for Ezra's hand, lacing their fingers together right there in front of Jordan. It was bold, reckless even, but Ezra didn't pull away. For the first time, he felt seen, not just by Theo, but by the world he'd been afraid to face. But the ease of that night didn't last. The next morning, Ezra woke to a text from his sister, Lila, back in Ohio. Mom heard from a friend you're living differently out there. She's freaking out. Call her. His stomach churned. Word traveled fast, even across states, and Ezra hadn't planned on coming out to his family yet. Not when he was still figuring out who he was. Theo, sprawled across the couch with a sketchbook, noticed his tension. Bad news? Theo asked, setting the pencil down. Ezra showed him the text. My mom, she's not exactly open-minded. If she knows about us, it's gonna be a mess. Theo's face softened, but there was a fire in his eyes. Then we faced the mess together. You're not alone in this, Ezra. The words were a lifeline, but Ezra couldn't shake the dread. He'd moved to San Francisco to escape the weight of his hometown's expectations, but they were catching up, threatening to pull him back into a closet he'd barely escaped. And then there was Jordan, who'd been nothing but supportive. But what if he told someone else? What if the news spread further? By midday, Ezra was spiraling. He paced the apartment, ignoring Theo's attempts to calm him. I wasn't ready for this, he snapped, more to himself than to Theo. I wasn't ready for everyone to know. Theo stood, crossing the room in 2 strides. Ezra, look at me. His voice was firm, but his touch was gentle as he cupped Ezra's face. You don't have to be ready for everyone. Just be ready for you. For us. Ezra wanted to believe him, but the fear was a living thing, clawing at his chest. He'd spent years hiding, building walls to protect himself. Theo was asking him to tear them down, and the thought was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. That afternoon, Jordan knocked on Ezra's door, his usual grin replaced by a serious expression. Hey man, I didn't mean to out you last night. I swear I haven't told anyone. But you okay? You look like you're carrying the world. Ezra hesitated, then let it spill. The text from Lila, the fear of his mom's reaction, the weight of being seen. Jordan listened, nodding slowly. Look, I get it. My cousin came out a few years back, and it was rough for him. But you've got people here who've got your back. Me, Theo, probably half the city if you let him. It was a small comfort, but it was enough to keep Ezra from drowning. That night, he called his mom. The conversation was a storm. Her voice sharp with worry, then anger, then silence. I just don't understand, she said finally. Why didn't you tell me? Ezra didn't have an answer, not one she'd accept. But as he hung up, Theo was there, pulling him into a hug that felt like home. We'll figure it out, Theo whispered, one step at a time. Ezra stared at the ceiling, the weight of his mom's words still pressing against his ribs. Theo lay beside him, his breathing soft and steady, a contrast to the chaos in Ezra's mind. It had been 3 days since the call, and though Theo's presence was a balm, the uncertainty of what came next gnawed at him. San Francisco buzzed outside their window, the city alive with pride flags and the hum of acceptance, but Ezra felt like an outsider in his own story. He'd always imagined coming out as a grand, deliberate act, a moment he'd control. Instead, it had been thrust upon him, first by Jordan's accidental discovery, and now by a gossip chain that stretched back to Ohio. Lila had texted again, warning that their mom was talking to their pastor, a man whose sermons had once made Ezra feel like he was committing a sin just by existing. Theo stirred, propping himself up on one elbow. You're thinking too loud, he said, his voice husky from sleep. Wanna share? Ezra sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. I keep thinking about how I didn't get to choose this. My mom, my town. They're deciding who I am before I can. Theo's expression hardened, but not at Ezra. Then take it back. You get to decide who you are, not them. Sounded so simple, but Ezra knew it wasn't. He'd seen what happened to kids like him back home. Whispers, cold shoulders, families fractured. Theo, who'd grown up in Portland with parents who marched in pride parades, couldn't fully understand the fear of losing everything. Still, his certainty was infectious, and when he leaned in to kiss Ezra's forehead, it felt like a promise. The next day, Ezra threw himself into work, sketching logos for a local bookstore. The distraction was a relief, but it didn't last. At lunch, Jordan slid into the booth across from him at a diner near their apartment, his usual energy subdued. "So, I did something," Jordan said, picking at his fries. "Don't hate me." Ezra's stomach dropped. "What did you do?" "I told my cousin about you and Theo. Not to gossip, I swear, just to get advice. He's been through this, and he said talking to someone neutral might help you. He wants to meet you if you're up for it." Ezra's first instinct was anger. Jordan had no right to share his story, but the sincerity in Jordan's eyes stopped him. "You should have asked me first," Ezra said, his voice tight. "I know. I'm sorry. I see you stressing, and I want to help." Ezra nodded, the anger fading into exhaustion. "Who's your cousin?" "His name's Marcus. He's 30, runs a community center downtown. He's good people, Ezra. He gets it." That evening, Ezra and Theo met Marcus at a small coffee shop in the Mission District. Marcus was tall, with a warm smile and a quiet confidence that put Ezra at ease. Over lattes, Marcus shared his story. Coming out at 19, losing friends, rebuilding his life in a city that embraced him. "It's not about changing who you are to fit their mold," Marcus said. "It's about finding the people who see you and say, 'Yeah, that's enough.'" Theo squeezed Ezra's hand under the table, and for the first time in days, Ezra felt a spark of hope. Marcus invited them to a support group at his community center, a place for queer folks to share their stories without judgment. Ezra wasn't sure he was ready, but Theo's encouraging nod made him agree to try. The support group was a revelation. In a small room with mismatched chairs and fairy lights, Ezra listened to strangers share their triumphs and scars. A trans woman named Aisha spoke about reclaiming her name. A non-binary teen named Riley talked about their first pride. Ezra didn't speak that night, but he felt the weight of his own silence lessening. Back at the apartment, Theo pulled Ezra close, their bodies fitting together like puzzle pieces. "You did good today," Theo murmured. "Just showing up. That's brave." Ezra wanted to argue, to say he hadn't done anything, but Theo's lips found his, and the words melted away. For a moment it was just them, the world outside irrelevant. But the moment shattered when Ezra's phone buzzed with another text from Lila. "Mom's coming to visit. Next week. She wants to talk." Panic surged through Ezra. His mom here in San Francisco? The thought of facing her, of seeing the disappointment in her eyes, was unbearable. Theo read the text over his shoulder and cursed softly. "Okay," he said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in Ezra's chest. "We'll deal with this. Together." Ezra nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. Theo was his anchor, but could he weather a storm this big? And what about Jordan, who'd unwittingly set this all in motion? Ezra didn't blame him, not really, but the ripples of that one moment, being caught in the act, were spreading, and Ezra wasn't sure he could keep his head above water. The week before Ezra's mom arrived felt like a countdown to a reckoning. Ezra threw himself into routine. Work, sketches, late-night talks with Theo. But the looming visit cast a shadow over everything. Theo, ever the optimist, tried to keep things light, dragging Ezra to a street fair in the Castro where they ate rainbow-colored cupcakes and danced to a local band. But even Theo's warmth couldn't fully erase Ezra's dread. Jordan, sensing the tension, became an unexpected ally. He offered to clean the apartment top to bottom, muttering something about making a good impression. Ezra appreciated it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that no amount of tidying could prepare him for his mom's judgment. Deborah, 52, was a woman of firm beliefs, shaped by a life in a conservative town where change was suspect. Ezra loved her, but he'd spent years shielding her from the parts of himself he knew she wouldn't accept. The night before her arrival, Ezra sat on the fire escape, sketching the city skyline to calm his nerves. Theo joined him, handing him a mug of chamomile tea. "You don't have to tell her everything," Theo said. "Just what feels true to you." "But what if she hates me?" Ezra's voice cracked, betraying the fear he'd been holding at bay. Theo's hand found his, steady as always. "Then she's missing out on someone incredible. But you'll still have me, and Jordan, and Marcus. You're not alone, Ezra." The words anchored him, but when Deborah's plane landed the next morning, Ezra felt like he was walking into a lion's den. She arrived at the apartment in a navy blazer, her graying hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes scanning the space like she was looking for evidence of sin. Jordan, to his credit, greeted her with a disarming grin and offered her coffee, which she accepted stiffly. The first hour was torture. Deborah asked about Ezra's job, the city, the weather, anything but the reason she was there. Finally, over dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant, she set her fork down and looked at Ezra. "Your sister says you're involved with someone. A man." Ezra's heart stopped. Theo, sitting beside him, reached for his hand under the table, a silent reminder of his promise. "Yeah," Ezra said, his voice barely above a whisper. "His name's Theo. He's important to me." Deborah's lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't what I raised you to be, Ezra." The words cut deeper than he'd expected, but Theo's grip tightened, giving him courage. "I'm still your son," Ezra said, his voice steadier now. "I'm just more myself than I've ever been." The table fell silent. Jordan, who'd insisted on joining to keep things chill, jumped in with a story about a coding bug he'd fixed, but the tension lingered. Deborah didn't speak for the rest of the meal, and when they returned to the apartment, she retired to the guest room without a word. That night, Ezra couldn't sleep. He lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, while Theo sat beside him, sketching in silence. "She might come around," Theo said eventually. "Or she might not. But you were honest. That's huge." Ezra wanted to believe him, but the weight of his mom's disapproval was crushing. The next day, Deborah was quieter, her questions more careful. She asked about Theo's job, his family, even his art. Ezra saw it as progress, however small, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding back. The turning point came unexpectedly. On her last day, Deborah asked to visit the community center where Marcus worked. Ezra was hesitant, but Theo encouraged him, sensing it might be a chance to bridge the gap. At the center, Marcus greeted them warmly, showing Deborah around the space. A haven for queer youth, filled with art, books, and laughter. Aisha from the support group was there, teaching a painting class. She shared her story with Deborah, not knowing who she was, and Ezra watched his mom's face soften, just a fraction. On the way back to the apartment, Deborah spoke. "I don't understand this world," she said, her voice low. "But I saw those kids today. They're just kids, trying to find their place. Like you. It wasn't acceptance, not fully, but it was a crack in the wall." Ezra clung to it, hoping it might widen with time. As they said goodbye at the airport, Deborah hugged him. A real hug, not the stiff embrace he'd expected. "I love you," she said. And though she didn't mention Theo, Ezra felt the words carry a new weight. Back in the apartment, life settled into a new rhythm. Ezra felt lighter, like he'd shed a layer of armor he hadn't realized he was wearing. Theo noticed it too, teasing him about the way he smiled more, the way he'd hum while sketching. But the journey wasn't over. Ezra still carried the weight of his mom's partial acceptance, and he knew the road to full understanding would be long. Jordan, ever the unexpected hero, became their biggest cheerleader. He started dragging Ezra and Theo to queer-friendly events around the city. Drag shows, book readings, even a pottery class where Ezra made a lopsided mug Theo insisted was artistic. Jordan's enthusiasm was infectious, and Ezra found himself opening up in ways he hadn't before. He started speaking at the support group, sharing small pieces of his story, each word a step toward owning his truth. But not everyone was as supportive. A coworker, Greg, overheard Ezra talking about Theo and made a snide comment about keeping it professional. It stung, reminding Ezra that even in a city like San Francisco, acceptance wasn't universal. He told Theo about it over dinner, expecting him to brush it off, but Theo's face darkened. "You don't have to take that," Theo said, his fork clattering against his plate. "Call him out, or quit. You're too talented to deal with that crap." Ezra hesitated. He loved his job, but Greg's words had planted a seed of doubt. Was he safe here? Could he be himself without repercussions? Theo, sensing his turmoil, reached across the table. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But don't let anyone make you feel small." The next day, Ezra confronted Greg, his voice shaking but firm. "My personal life doesn't affect my work. If you've got a problem, that's on you." To his surprise, Greg backed down, mumbling an apology. It wasn't a victory, not really, but it was enough to remind Ezra he had a voice. As weeks turned into months, Ezra and Theo grew closer, their relationship a mix of fiery passion and quiet comfort. They spent weekends exploring the city, from the foggy cliffs of Ocean Beach to the vibrant murals of the Mission. Ezra started painting again, something he hadn't done since college, inspired by Theo's fearless creativity. One of his pieces, a swirling abstract of blues and golds, inspired by their first kiss, sold at a local gallery, and Theo's proud grin was worth more than the check. But the past wasn't done with Ezra. Lila called one evening, her voice tight with worry. "Mom's been talking to the pastor again. He's pushing her to fix you." She's confused, Ezra. She doesn't know what to believe. Ezra's heart sank. He'd hoped his mom's visit had been a turning point, but old habits died hard. He told Theo, expecting him to be angry, but Theo just pulled him close. "She's trying," he said. "It's messy, but she's trying. Give her time." Ezra wasn't sure he had the patience, but Theo's faith kept him grounded. They decided to invite Lila to visit, hoping she could be a bridge between Ezra and their mom. Lila, 22, was more open-minded than Deborah, but she'd always been caught between loyalty to her family and her own beliefs. When she arrived, she was hesitant, her eyes darting between Ezra and Theo like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Over coffee, Lila admitted she'd been talking to their mom, trying to soften her views. "She's scared," Lila said. "Not of you, but of what she doesn't understand. The pastor's filling her head with nonsense, but she's starting to question it." Ezra felt a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by years of caution. He showed Lila the community center, introduced her to Marcus and Aisha, let her see the world he was building. By the end of her visit, Lila hugged him tightly. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, "and I'll work on Mom. Promise." As Lila's plane took off, Ezra felt a shift. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for a future where he could be whole, not just in San Francisco, but in the eyes of the people he loved. Months later, Ezra stood on the balcony of their new apartment, a small but bright space they'd moved into with Theo. The city sparkled below, a tapestry of lights and possibilities. Jordan had moved out, chasing a job in Seattle, but he'd left behind a group chat filled with memes and promises to visit. Ezra missed him, but the distance had given him and Theo room to grow into something solid, something real. The journey hadn't been easy. Ezra's mom still struggled, but she'd started calling more, asking about his art, even mentioning Theo by name once. It was progress, slow but real, and Ezra held onto it like a lifeline. Lila had become their biggest ally, sending updates about their mom's gradual softening, her questions about the community center, her quiet doubts about the pastor's rhetoric. Ezra had changed too. He'd quit his job after another incident with Greg, taking a leap to freelance full-time. It was terrifying, but Theo's unwavering support and a few high-profile clients made it work. He'd started painting more, his work gaining traction in local galleries. Theo, meanwhile, had enrolled in art school, his sketches turning into bold, vibrant pieces that told stories of their own. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, Theo pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple silver ring, etched with a tiny wave pattern. "It's not a proposal," Theo said, his voice teasing but soft. "Not yet, but it's a promise. I'm in this, Ezra. For all of it." Ezra's throat tightened, not with fear but with a joy so fierce it hurt. He slipped the ring on, feeling its weight, its meaning. "I'm in too," he said, and when Theo kissed him, it felt like the city cheered. The community center became their second home. Ezra started volunteering, leading art workshops for queer youth. He saw himself in their hesitant smiles, their guarded stories, and he poured everything into helping them feel seen. Marcus called him a natural, and Aisha teased that he was stealing her thunder. But it was Theo who grounded him, always there with a quip or a touch to remind him he wasn't alone. One day, an unexpected letter arrived from Deborah. It was short, written in her careful cursive. "I'm still learning," she wrote, "but I want to know you, Ezra. All of you. I'm trying." Enclosed was a photo of her at a small pride event in Ohio, holding a sign that read, "Love is love." It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Ezra framed the photo, hanging it beside his paintings. It was a reminder of how far he'd come, from a boy hiding in Ohio to a man building a life in San Francisco, surrounded by love he hadn't dared to dream of. The moment Jordan had caught them had been a spark, igniting a journey of fear, courage, and hope. And as Ezra stood with Theo, watching the sunset paint the city gold, he knew he'd do it all again. Because love, caught in the act, was worth every breathless moment.